The official report was a masterpiece of professional ruin. It painted my husband, Captain David Keller, a man who had bled for his country on 3 continents, as a traitor. It was concise, clinical, and utterly devastating. A single, sterile document designed to erase a lifetime of honor. His superiors, men he'd called brothers, men whose children had played in our backyard, offered me condolences with the same hands they'd used to sign his career's death warrant. They stood in my living room, their faces etched with practiced sorrow. They spoke of duty, of difficult decisions, of regrettable but necessary conclusions. They thought his wife, the quiet librarian who organized base charity drives, would be a footnote in their victory. They thought I would cry. They were right about the tears. They were wrong about everything else. Before the lies, our life was built on a foundation of quiet certainty. It was a life measured in the crisp folds of a uniform, the scent of polish on jump boots, and the steady rhythm of a heart sworn to service. David wasn't just a soldier. He was an ideal made real. He was an Army Ranger, one of those rare men who runs toward chaos. Not because he's fearless, but because his sense of duty is stronger than any fear he might feel. He wore his decorations not as trophies, but as reminders of the promises he'd made to his country, to his men, and to me. I didn't meet him on a dusty firing range or at a formal military ball. I met him in the hushed aisles of the post library where I worked. He was looking for a book on Roman military strategy, and he had an intensity that was both intimidating and deeply compelling. He spoke with a quiet confidence, a universe away from the brash arrogance I'd seen in other men his age. He was a leader who listened more than he spoke, a warrior with the soul of a scholar. Our courtship was a whirlwind of handwritten letters during his deployments and long rambling conversations about everything and nothing when he was home. We built our home on that shared understanding. Our house, a modest 2-story just off base, was our sanctuary. It was the one place where Captain Keller could just be David, where the weight of command was left at the door, replaced by the simple joys of a badly played guitar, the smell of steak on the grill, and the endless, patient task of trying to teach our golden retriever, Cato, not to steal socks. His men revered him. I saw it in their eyes when they came over for barbecues. They didn't just respect his rank. They trusted his judgment, his very being. He knew the names of their wives and the birthdays of their children. He pushed them harder than anyone, but he was always the first to share his water on a forced march and the last to eat in the mess hall. He believed leadership was an act of service, a sacred trust between a commander and his soldiers. His direct superior was Major Evans. On the surface, Evans was the model officer, sharp, ambitious, with a political savvy that David lacked and, frankly, disdained. Evans knew how to manage perceptions, how to navigate the complex currents of military bureaucracy. He and David had come up together, but their paths were diverging. David was a field man, happiest with his boots on the ground. Evans was a career man, his eyes fixed on the stars he wanted on his shoulders. They kept up a professional, even friendly relationship. David, in his unwavering decency, just saw Evans's ambition as another form of dedication. He couldn't imagine that for some men. Ambition is a fire that burns away everything else: loyalty, integrity, and honor itself. Above Evans was the base commander, Colonel Thorne. Thorne was a man carved from granite, a relic of a colder, more certain time. He saw the world in black and white. Missions succeeded or failed. Soldiers were assets or liabilities. He appreciated David's results, but he had little patience for the human element of command that David prized so highly. 2 Thorne soldiers were instruments. He only cared that the instrument was sharp, not about the hand that wielded it. It was a dangerous kind of simplicity, one that left no room for nuance, and as I would soon learn, no room for justice. They were the chain of command that defined our lives, the structure David trusted, the hierarchy he'd sworn to uphold. He believed in it wholly and without reservation. He believed the uniform meant something, that the bonds forged in shared hardship were unbreakable. That was his faith. And it was that faith that made their betrayal not just a professional injustice, but a profound, soul-crushing sacrilege. They didn't just frame a soldier. They desecrated the very institution he loved, and they did it with a smile. The mission was codenamed Operation Desert Spear. The official briefing called it a high-stakes recon and capture operation in a volatile border region. It was the kind of mission David's unit was built for. Complex, dangerous, requiring surgical precision. He spent weeks preparing his men, poring over intel, running drills until every move was second nature. The night before he left, he was quiet. Not worried, but focused. He kissed me at the door, the familiar scratch of his uniform against my cheek. "Just another day at the office," he said, his smile tight but reassuring. "I'll see you in 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, Major Evans and a chaplain were on my doorstep. The story they told was neat, tidy, a narrative scrubbed clean of any inconvenient truths. According to their report, the mission had gone catastrophically wrong. They'd walked into a sophisticated ambush. 2 soldiers were dead. The failure, they explained with cold clinical precision, was due to a catastrophic lapse in judgment. David's judgment? They claimed he'd gone off-plan, acting on faulty intel he'd developed on his own. They alleged he had arrogantly pushed his men into a trap, directly violating the orders of Colonel Thorne and Major Evans. He was posthumously charged with dereliction of duty. He was the scapegoat. The report was an elegant fiction, complete with its forged communications logs, and even carefully edited statements from a few junior soldiers who, under immense pressure from Evans, had backed up the official story. It painted David as a rogue officer whose ego had led his men to their deaths. It was a story that protected the chain of command. It protected the new high-tech surveillance gear they were testing on the mission, and most of all, it protected Major Evans and Colonel Thorne. I remember sitting on our sofa, the official report on the coffee table like a venomous snake. The words blurred: dereliction, reckless, disgraced. It was an assault on everything he was. David was meticulous. He was the officer who triple-checked everything. The idea that he would go rogue wasn't just wrong. It was absurd. Major Evans placed a hand on my shoulder. "Amelia," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic empathy. "I know this is difficult. David was a fine soldier, one of the best. But even the best can make mistakes. The pressure, it gets to everyone." I looked at his hand on my shoulder. This was the hand of a man who'd never choked on the dust David had, never felt the fear David had faced. This was the hand of a man who was lying. A cold clarity cut through my grief, so sharp and pure it nearly took my breath away. They had built their fortress of lies on the foundation of my husband's good name. They thought the silence of his death would be the end of the story. They were about to learn that I was the keeper of his voice. The funeral was a carefully staged piece of theater, a military burial that felt like a complete sham. The 21-gun salute echoed with hypocrisy. The folded flag they handed me felt heavy with their lies. Colonel Thorne gave a brief, passionless eulogy, speaking of the difficult realities of modern warfare. He never once looked me in the eye. Afterward, at our home, members of David's unit came to offer condolences. They were so young, their faces still etched with the shock of combat and loss. Most just mumbled a few words and moved on, their eyes darting nervously toward Major Evans, who watched the room like a hawk. But one of them, a young sergeant named Miller, who David had mentored, held my gaze for a moment too long. His eyes were a chaotic mix of grief and something else, shame. As he hugged me, he pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Keller," he whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't deserve this. Later that night, in the oppressive silence of the house, I unfolded the paper. It was a small, torn page from a field notebook. On it were 3 words, hastily scrawled: "The gear failed." It wasn't a confession, it wasn't proof, but it was a start. A crack in the pristine facade of their lie, and it was all I needed. They wrote the end of his story. I was about to write the epilogue for theirs. Grief is a fog, but for me, that note was a lighthouse. The gear failed. It became my mantra. My background wasn't in covert ops. I was a librarian. My world was the Dewey Decimal System, digital archives, and the patient, methodical hunt for information. I didn't have access to classified databases or a network of informants, but I had a quiet, unshakable belief that a single verifiable fact could unravel a universe of lies, and I knew how to research. I turned our spare bedroom into a war room. I bought a new secure laptop that had never touched our home network and loaded it with privacy software. I started with the gear. The report mentioned a new communications system. The Aegis 7 was on its first field deployment. The report blamed David's rogue communications, but Sergeant Miller's note suggested the gear itself was the problem. I started where I always start: open sources. I dove into defense industry publications and government contract databases. Aegis 7 was made by a company called Satelian Defense Solutions. On the surface, they were a rising star, winning a surprising number of lucrative contracts. Their marketing was slick, full of buzzwords like next-generation connectivity. But as I dug deeper, I found whispers of problems on obscure forums. For veterans and comm specialists, anonymous posts complained about Satelian's civilian-grade equipment being rebranded and sold at military-grade prices. There were rumors of signal drops and catastrophic failures during testing, rumors that were quickly scrubbed from mainstream sites. It was a pattern, a whisper of dissent, followed by a swift, clean erasure. Someone was actively managing online reputation. My next target was the people. I started with Colonel Thorne. His official bio was pristine, but public records told another story. I pulled property records, political contribution filings, corporate registrations. I found he sat on the advisory board of a small investment firm. After hours of cross-referencing SEC filings, I discovered that firm held a significant stake in a holding company that, 3 layers down, was the primary investor in Cetellion. It was a connection, but it was thin, plausibly deniable. Major. Evans was harder. He was younger, more digitally savvy, his online footprint sanitized, but people are never that clean. I couldn't approach David's men directly. Evans would hear about it instantly, so I went sideways. I started researching their wives. I created a fake profile, a new wife, just moved to the area and joined the base spouses Facebook groups. It was slow, painstaking work. I commented on posts about bake sales and daycare. I became a trusted, if distant, member of the online community, and I listened. One day the wife of David's comms specialist posted a vague complaint about her husband working late, shredding a mountain of paperwork from the last training rotation. She deleted the post within an hour, but not before I screenshotted it. Shredding documents after a fatal mission isn't standard procedure. It's a cleanup. The real breakthrough came from David himself. He had always handled our finances. As I sorted through years of statements, I found something. For 2 years, David had been making small, regular donations to a veterans watchdog group known for investigating military waste and fraud. On a hunch, I contacted them. Using an encrypted email, I said I was the widow of a soldier killed because of faulty equipment. I named the Aegis 7 and Cetellion. Their reply came 2 days later. We have other reports about this product. Can you provide any internal documentation? I had nothing. They had swept the house after his death, taking his work laptop, his notebooks, everything. I felt a wave of despair. I had threads and shadows, but nothing concrete. That night, unable to sleep, I went into David's study. I sat in his chair, running my hand over the worn leather. I wasn't going to give up. I opened his desk drawers, not sure what I was looking for. And there, taped to the very back of the bottom drawer, was a slim USB drive. So well hidden I'd missed it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I took it to my secure laptop, my hands shaking as I plugged it in. Encrypted, of course. I tried the obvious passwords: our anniversary, my birthday, Cato's name, nothing. Then I remembered our first date in the library, the book he'd been looking for. He'd quoted a line from it, a line he said defined his philosophy. Si vis pacem, parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. I typed it in. S-I-V-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E-E. Inside was dade by dast grad. Inside it by out with dade odd, by it conside sal, in it side by sow it, inside side ein soud and sat to my the tune, and the bud sow what an Ethan sect to tag, we and at that I'm sick that you did the that's what the week I got that kick we that's For 6 months, he had detailed every failed test of the Aegis 7 system. He'd attached copies of his own memos to Major Evans, formally recommending the system not be deployed. And then there was the final entry, dated 2 days before his last mission. It was an email chain. First, his official memo to Evans, stating the Aegis 7 was not combat ready. Second, Evans's reply, a direct order to proceed with the mission and the faulty gear. Consider this matter closed. The final email in the chain was the one that sealed their fate. It was from Evans to Colonel Thorne. Evans had forwarded David's concerns, but added his own spin. Thorne, it began. With chilling informality, Keller is getting cold feet again. He's trying to blame the gear to cover for his own lack of nerve. Don't worry, I've handled it. He'll follow orders. And the partners at Cetellion will be very pleased with the field data we collect. Your bonus depends on it. Bonus partners. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a conspiracy. They'd sacrificed him and his men for a payout. The fog of grief finally lifted, burned away by the white-hot fire of pure righteous rage. I had them. Knowing the truth is one thing, proving it is another. David's log was the core of my case, but Evans and Thorne would just call it a fabrication. I needed to build a case so airtight that it would crush them under its sheer, undeniable weight. My quiet work was about to become a quiet war. I sent a single encrypted email to the watchdog group. I have internal documentation from Captain David Keller. The reply was immediate. Secure video call, tomorrow, 1400 hours. The man on the call was a retired JAG officer named Marcus. He was a bulldog who now fought the Army's internal battles from the outside. I didn't show my face. I used a voice modulator. I was a ghost. I explained the situation and sent him one page from David's log, the email from Evans to Thorne, mentioning the bonus. There was a long silence. "If this is real," Marcus said, his voice low and intense, "this is criminal conspiracy, bribery, potentially negligent homicide." He paused. "To guarantee a result, we need more. We need to find the money. Find the money." My next battlefield, Satelian Defense Solutions, was a private company, its financials opaque. But government contractors leave a trail. I began a deep dive into federal contracting databases, weeks of mind-numbing work, cross-referencing LLCs and corporate registrations. I was looking for a weak link. I found it in a company called Althea Logistics. On paper, it was a shipping consultant in Delaware that had received a multi-million-dollar subcontract from Satelian for component sourcing. But Althea had no website, no physical address. It was a ghost company, a cutout designed to move. Money. The challenge was linking Althea to Evans or Thorne. I hit a wall. Then I remembered something David once told me about Major Evans. He was vain, and he loved his Boda 40-foot sailboat, far too expensive for a major's salary. A supposed family inheritance. It was a loose thread. I decided to pull on it under my fake profile. I joined sailing forums. I learned the language. I found the marina's social media page and identified Evans's boat, the Albatross. Then, my heart pounding, I drove to the marina. Dressed in nondescript clothes, a baseball cap pulled low, I walked the docks. I found his boat, and on the transom was the registration number. Public maritime records are easy to access if you have a number. The boat wasn't registered to Major Charles Evans. It was registered to Althea Logistics. It was arrogant. It was sloppy, and it was going to be his downfall. Now I had Evans, but Thorne was smarter. I went back to the base spouses group and started a conversation about home renovations. As I'd hoped, another wife chimed in, mentioning Colonel Thorne's wife had just had a massive new wing added to their house, a sunroom and a home gym. The wife commented, with a hint of envy, "They must have come into some money." She said that Colonel's investments finally paid off. I hired a local private investigator. His job was simple: get photos of the Thorne's new renovation and find the contractor. A week later, he delivered. The photos showed a lavish addition. The contractor's truck was visible in one shot. County permit records showed the contractor had been paid in full, not by Thorne but by Satelian Defense Solutions. The invoice was listed as a promotional expense. They were so arrogant they didn't think anyone would ever look. I had it all: David's log, the link from Evans to the shell company via his boat, the direct payment from Satelian to Thorne's home contractor. I compiled it into a single, devastating dossier, organized with the clinical precision of a librarian. I sent the complete package to Marcus. His response was a single sentence: "They are finished." Marcus knew the system. A frontal assault would get bogged down, so he went straight for the one person in Washington, D.C. who had built a career on taking down corrupt defense contractors: Senator Catherine O'Malley, the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. She was, as Marcus put it, the last honest broker in town. Marcus arranged a secure meeting on Capitol Hill. Present were Senator O'Malley, her aides, Marcus, and a 3-star general from the Pentagon who happened to be a rival of Thorne's. I was there too, connected via a secure anonymous audio link. My voice was the only part of me in the room. Marcus laid out the case, piece by piece. He started with David's record, then described the mission and the cover-up. Then he presented the evidence. He projected the email from Evans to Thorne onto a large screen. The words, "Your bonus depends on it," hung in the silent room. He followed it with the flowchart linking Satelian to Althea Logistics. The next slide was a picture of Evans's gleaming sailboat next to the registration, showing Althea Logistics as the owner. A low murmur went through the room. Finally, he showed the pictures of Colonel Thorne's new sunroom, and then the final, damning document, the invoice from the contractor, paid in full by Satelian. Senator O'Malley, who had been listening with unnerving stillness, finally spoke. "General," she said, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority, "I trust you find this as disturbing as I do." The general looked shaken. "Senator," he said, his voice tight, "this is not just disturbing. This is a betrayal of the highest order, a cancer on the honor of the uniform." "I agree," O'Malley said. She then addressed the speakerphone. "Ma'am," she said, the formal address filled with profound respect, "you have performed a great service to this country. You have done the work the army should have done. Your husband was a hero. We are going to make sure the entire world knows it." That afternoon, military police acting on direct orders prompted by a strong recommendation from Senator O'Malley's office walked into the base headquarters. They pulled Major Evans out of a meeting, stripping him of his credentials. In the middle of the hallway, they arrested Colonel Thorne in his office. The public nature of their arrests was not an accident. It was a message. The fallout was swift and merciless. The story I had so carefully constructed became the official one. News outlets ran headlines about corruption, conspiracy, and the sordid tale of two senior officers who sold out their soldiers for a boat and a sunroom. Evans and Thorne faced their defense crumbled. They were found guilty on all charges: conspiracy, bribery, fraud, and negligent homicide. They were sentenced to lengthy prison terms at Fort Leavenworth, dishonorably discharged, stripped of their rank and pensions. They were erased from the institution they had disgraced. A few weeks later, a small private ceremony was held. The three-star general from the hearing presided. He read a formal apology from the Secretary of the Army and announced that all charges against Captain David Keller were his record was corrected to reflect he had died a hero, trying to save his men from the corruption of his superiors. They presented me with a new flag, and this time it felt light. It felt like honor. The general posthumously awarded David the Distinguished Service Cross. As he handed me the medal, he leaned in and said in a low voice only I could hear, "Your husband was a great soldier, Mrs. Keller, but you are one of the finest investigators I have ever seen." I sold the house. I packed up the memories and left that world behind. I took David's medal, his books, and his final folded flag, and I moved to a quiet town by the sea. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They forget to mention that sometimes it's not about temperature. It's about precision. It's about using the enemy's own weight and arrogance against them, until they collapse under the burden of their own lies. They thought I was just a wife, a grieving widow, a footnote. They never understood that my greatest strength wasn't anger, it was my patience. The same patience I used to search for a single, elusive truth. In the quiet of a library, they built an empire of deceit, but they made one fatal mistake. They forgot to check the fine print. And in the end, that's where I was waiting. If you enjoyed this story of calculated justice, please subscribe to the channel and share this video. Let us know in the comments what you think is the most powerful form of revenge. Thank you for listening.